My next guest struggle with mental health began in the 8th grade when she was 13. Not long after she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, she embraced psychopharmaceutical solutions and so began a 14-year ordeal in which she describes herself as a professional psychiatric patient. There were many doctors, 4 hospitalizations, 1 serious suicide attempt, and then came an epiphany and life change. It's now been 14 years since she last took a psychiatric drug. Laura Delano tells her story in a new book. It's called Unshrunk, a story of psychiatric treatment resistance. Laura, thank you for being here. To all who just heard that intro, they're probably thinking, she must have been misdiagnosed. But that's not the case.
No, it's not. And thanks for having me, Michael. I definitely met the criteria of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, Psychiatry's so-called Bible of diagnoses. For me, it's been about realizing that that is just a story that isn't necessarily factually true about who I am and what my suffering meant and means today. So mine's been a journey of letting go of what I've realized as a fictional narrative of self, rather than realizing it was a mistake.
I'm going to put on the screen a part of your book, and I'll read it aloud. The more I read, the more that I could see that the personal mess I'd gotten myself into with psychiatric drug dependence and withdrawal was actually a complex, politicized, society-wide mess in which many millions of people have gotten lost. How could this have happened to me on such a massive scale? When I dove into learning about the process by which the psychiatric drugs are researched and brought to market, I began to understand a big part of the answer. What should the treatment of you have been? Looking back with what you know now, what should the response have been from the mental health community?
Well, I think really it's about what other spaces do I wish had been there for me to seek help in besides only the mental health system. I think my parents were terrified. Their struggling 13-year-old daughter was acting out, cutting herself. I was physically aggressive. I was screaming. I was yelling. In looking back, I wish that there had been a visible space, whether in my own school where I could see other young girls, older girls who had been through their own struggles, come through the other side. And I wish for my parents that they had seen other options, perhaps other parents, family support systems. I think for us, the only visible option my parents saw were mental health professionals and eventually doctors and pills. And I think that's really what my story is about. It's about asking us to wonder why there's so few other options beyond those on offer to us.
The New York Times, I think, favorably reviewed your book. There was this comment. I'll put this on the screen and read it as well. Delano's story is compelling, important, even haunting, but plenty of readers will chafe at her lack of interest in those who have actually been helped by these medications, especially today when they're facing criticisms from some quarters. You were a guest of mine on Sirius XM, and a caller called thereafter and to this point said, this is dangerous. People might listen to this or read the book and go off their meds. You know that criticism. Address it.
I share the same concern. It is incredibly dangerous to stop a psychiatric drug. And I think for me, I didn't know that back when I decided to leave behind my medications. And so I went through an incredibly difficult experience of what I now understand were actually withdrawal symptoms, because I had been on these medications for so long that my body had become physically dependent on them. And so I share the same concern. And really, my book is just my personal story. I'm just talking about my own process of going through the mental health system and deciding to come out of it, my own process of learning and unlearning. It's not a statement against anyone who feels helped by medications. I have many friends who feel helped by medications. Really, what I'm trying to do is expand the conversation so that there is also space for those of us who haven't felt helped or perhaps have even felt harmed to have our stories heard as well.
In the same way that you say the diagnosis, I met the diagnosis, the bipolar diagnosis, it's not as if someone gave me a label that didn't seem to apply. Similarly, in the book, you're very candid about life today. It seems like you're doing well, but everything's not 100%. Maybe it isn't for any of us. Address that issue.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, being human is hard. It's hard to be alive. It hurts to be alive. And I think what I realized in coming out the other side of the mental health industry, as I like to call it, is that I had spent the most formative years of my life believing that I needed to reach a point at which I felt happy and balanced and put together, and that if I struggled, felt angst, felt fear, felt despair, it meant something was wrong with me that I needed to fix with some kind of treatment. And so today my life is full and rich and meaningful. I feel connected to myself, to my body, to my family, to friends, to nature, to my work, to a sense of purpose. But I also feel intense anxiety on a pretty regular basis. I have a lot going on. There's a lot to be anxious about. I feel grief about the state of the world and all the struggles that we're in. I feel intense emotions that I would once have thought of as symptoms, so to speak. The only difference is that today I'm not afraid of them, and I know that they are conveying messages about my relationship to the world around me.
The epiphany moment for you was reading another book, Robert Whitaker's book. Talk to me briefly about how that changed your perspective.
So this was in 2010. I was 27 years old. I had spent the previous decade basically falling ever further into dysfunction, despair, disability. My 20s looked like a series of hospitalizations, programs, couldn't hold down work, had basically no friendships, dependent on my family, and I happened to have been born in a family that could take care of me, which many people aren't so lucky to be. So there I was in a bookstore on a weekend visit away from this day hospital that I was a patient in, and I found this book on a bookshelf. It had a bunch of different psychiatric drug names on it. I thought, what is this book? I've been on almost all these medications. I picked it up. I sat down to read it. And the thesis of this book is basically that if you look at what the long-term evidence is telling us about psychiatric drug use in America, there's a strong case to make that it's collectively making us sicker. And there I was, reflecting back on all those years of worsening dysfunction, eventually reaching the point, like you said, that I tried to kill myself because my life was so miserable that I saw no point in going on. And I wondered in an instant, holy cow, what if it hasn't been so-called treatment-resistant mental illness that I've been believing all these years, where I'm just so defective, nothing can help me? What if it's been the treatment? And that is what really set me on the path that I'm on today.
So thank you for being here. I'm going to underscore that Laura Delano is doing well and is not here to advocate that people go off their meds, right? You've described in the book the tapering that worked well for you, but we don't want people to get the wrong message. Continued good health, and thank you.
Thank you for having me, Michael. Thanks.
Let's see what you're saying via social media from the world of X, I believe. Psychiatric medications have worsened patient outcomes. They leave so many patients disabled and dead without any help because the medical field is in denial. I think this was all a big money grab. JC, I'm just going to say to you that psychiatric medications work for many. I don't want someone to get the wrong message from this conversation. The book is being very much discussed. I think it's a very worthy read, and one size does not fit all.